You've heard me say that diversity research is used to manipulate you. Well, it seems that diversity reports are being used to do the same thing. And you really need to know how this happens. I'm Dr. Jonathan. I work with organizations to make them inclusive, and I'm on a mission to help 1 million people like you to make your workplace inclusive. Get your pen and paper ready, because we're talking about how diversity reports lie to you. There's an illusion of inclusion. I've said it for years, it's nice to find someone else talking about it too. Someone sent me a Forbes article and it was called DEI Reports Mask Lack of Progress and the Path to Transparency by Aparna Ray. And the premise was this: more companies are publishing diversity, equity, inclusion reports because a couple of years ago, a lot of them made pledges. You remember that, right? We're an anti-racist organization. We're on a journey to be inclusive. Diversity is part of our DNA. The article basically says that companies are publishing DEI reports because they want to show that they've made a move on their pledge, but, and this is a quote, the lack of progress with DEI is largely hidden. So what does that mean? Well, the author says they're creating a false sense of progress. The authors say that leaders feel a sense of accomplishment that maybe they shouldn't. The author says that people from underrepresented minority groups remain skeptical. But when they say DEI reports, what do they mean? Well, the author spoke to an analytics leader called Rob Hadley to uncover common ways in which organizations misrepresent progress. And I love this part. They read dozens of reports. And I like this. Why? Because I've read dozens of reports. I've read hundreds of reports. And I agreed with most of what they said. I'm not going to repeat each and every thing, but I have picked 5 things that I do want to discuss. Now, the first thing they said was awkward and offensive. And I found it funny because my humor on this topic is awkward, it is offensive, and it's all about marketing. They said, and this is a quote, the majority of these progress reports are essentially marketing. And I laughed so hard when I read this because it is so true. Not only that, people celebrate this stuff on social media. People celebrate these fake reports with no progress. They picked an organization, I'm not going to repeat their name, but they followed the playbook on saying very little. Now let's play a game. Here's a few things. Tell me if you recognize this from a diversity report near you. High-level data, pages of quotes, vision statements, and often repeated commitments. I laughed because this is the go-to strategy that you use when you don't have anything to say. Remember we did a show about how diversity and inclusion is like the birth of hip-hop? I spoke about KRS-One, and he speaks about how rappers, or in my mind, DEI leaders, they don't rely on talent, they rely on marketing and promotion. This is the kind of thing I mean. What should be a progress report is actually padded out with lots of marketing content. This is infuriating if you actually want to learn about the progress. This doesn't happen with financial reports, does it? So the second thing was about demographic data. They picked up on the point that when companies share demographic data, it doesn't really tell you much. What they don't share are breakdowns by race, ethnicity, gender, job title, even department or function. In the article, they also mentioned intersectionality, but to be honest, intersectionality is a word that gets thrown around a lot. What I think they meant was the people who create the reports don't provide enough meaningful analysis to understand the population being discussed. That's what I think they meant. They didn't actually say that. For example, they could say how many black women are at a particular grade in a particular department within the organization. Now, in defense of the people who make these reports, to provide that level of detail at every grade for all the different types of people, even if it was race, gender, sexual orientation, depending on how you present it, that could be equally meaningless. And I've seen people attempt that. My point is, if you don't know how to present this information, this is an indicator of a lack of resources. It's an indicator of a lack of skill because it's not acceptable in any other field. The third thing is about how data is presented, and it's kind of related to the previous point. Let me give you some context for this. I've got an accounting background. I've also got a research background. But what this means is I understand how to present data. Some of the people I've worked with in the past were intimidated by all the numbers. This is when I realized that people weren't paying me. They didn't like me because I could run the numbers. Loads of people can do that. People like me because I could make the numbers make sense to them. I didn't give them a generic report from the accounting department. I gave you things that helped you to make decisions. I understand how to present data. It also means I know how to manipulate data. And there's an old accounting joke, and it's only funny to accountants. It's a bit dated, but you'll get the point. And the story goes like this. An accountant goes for a job interview. After a few minutes, the interviewer gets a set of financial accounts, throws it on the desk and says, I want you to tell me if we're making a profit or loss. The accountant looks around, gets up, closes the door, and whispers to the interviewer, do you want to make a profit or do you want to make a loss? Like I said, that joke is only funny to accountants. The point being, we can manipulate data to say what we want. It's even scarier when you're a researcher. It's even scarier when people don't understand the numbers and they use that data, they use that research, they use what they think is evidence to say things that aren't true. Case in point, the business case for diversity. I've said it before and I'll say it again. It has not been established in the way that people have led you to believe. So what's this got to do with DEI reports? Well, you better trust the people who make these reports. You better trust that they've got your best interests at heart, and you better trust that they're transparent about what they did. If not, you've got a problem. The name of the article was DEI Reports Mask a Lack of Progress and the Path to Transparency. You need them to be transparent about what they did. This is how you protect yourself. And a lot of this is about standards. Accounting standards exist to prevent scenarios that I described in my poor accounting joke. Without them, accountants have the capability of ruining your life. Because we can make the numbers say what we want. DEI reports, there aren't really any standards. This is why they're able to say what they want. This is why accountants have a thing called a true and fair view. And you know what? I'll make a whole show about that in the future. The fourth thing is about sentiment, and I'm going to give you a quote. The over-reliance on employee sentiment data as proxy for real operation data. This touches on two things. First, this is clearly about the proxy problem of diversity and inclusion. We've talked about this before. A proxy is an alternative variable that's observed or measured when the variable that we're really interested in can't be observed or measured directly. In that show, I gave 3 examples. GDP per capita is a proxy for the standard of living. Reading and math proficiency in children is a proxy for quality education. Homicide rates are a proxy for how safe a country is. Does that mean that GDP per capita is the same as the standard of living? No, of course not. But it's generally accepted that where GDP per capita is high, the standard of living is high. It's a useful proxy if it's true, if the relationship is true. The authors said that instead of providing operational data, for example, increases in diversity hiring, organizations are providing employee sentiment data, and this masks what's actually happening. Now, the authors said that it was important, but it needed to be combined with the operational data. I agree, but I think people rely too much on it. This is where it makes me think about happy sheets. They're sentimental. When I say happy sheets, I'm talking about these satisfaction scores that don't really mean much. Do you know how many people feel comfortable putting in their reports that they had 85% satisfaction on training, or 85% of people said they'd recommend it? What they don't say is 85% of people have increased their ability to recognize discrimination, or 85% of people are now able to intervene to prevent exclusion, or whatever you think you're trying to achieve. They don't talk about that because they're not making progress on that. They're not even measuring it. The fifth and final thing I want to talk about is how organizations measure inclusion and what that means for belonging. And you've guessed it, we've made a whole show about that too. I actually wrote about this in our newsletter recently. The author discussed the problems with the way that inclusion is measured. And they said, and this is a quote, most HR and DEI practitioners don't understand the survey science and may pick and choose questions to create their own inflated inclusion score, negating their reliability and validity. Now let's be clear, that's harsh. It's also fair. I think that's accurate. So many people create inclusion surveys that are meaningless. Honestly, they use measures that either someone told them to use or they just pull together themselves. Now, this is one of the reasons why I think belonging has become such a popular topic in organizations, in DEI. And I'm going to give you a scenario. I've said it before, this is not a fictional story. Organization X has spent a lot of time designing questionnaires to measure inclusion. And let's say they got over 80% scores saying they're inclusive. So they're feeling quite good about themselves. Now, when they actually speak to people, a lot of people said that the workplace isn't inclusive. They said that they don't feel like they belong. And so the leaders, they respond by this. Well, we're scoring high on inclusion, so this isn't an inclusion problem. It must be something else. Did they say something about belonging? It must be that. This is evidence. It must be. It's belonging. And when you say it like that, it kind of makes sense, doesn't it? And you can get away with that for a while. The problem with that logic is that it's based on a false evidence. They weren't even measuring inclusion properly. They were using some budget instruments they got off the internet. Honestly, this is so common, it's scary. This is not a fictional story. This is not a one case study that I've done. I come across this all the time. Check out the article. Let me know what you think. There are a few things in there that I haven't covered here. You're also probably thinking, okay, look, we do want to do this properly. What do we do? Well, the solutions were kind of baked into the points that I made, but look, let's outline this really quickly. 5 things. 1, instead of marketing, actually report progress. 2, provide demographic data that is meaningful to a casual reader who doesn't really care about the topic. 3, present information that presents what accountants call a true and fair view. If you're not sure, ask yourself, is this a reasonable representation of what actually happened, or are we trying to spin it? 4, use real proxies, not fake ones. Use proxies that are related to the thing that you claim, not things that can be easily shot down because they're completely irrelevant, not red herrings. And 5, and I can't believe I'm saying this, but use instruments that actually work, that actually measure the thing that you're interested in. This is really important to get right because the standards are so low and it is so damaging. People are talking about diversity fatigue and is diversity dead? All of this stuff contributes to it. But look, I'm not normally this explicit, but if you're completely lost, give me a call because we really need people to start getting this right. We have to accept that part of the problem is this shoddy reporting, things that don't mean anything. Of course, people are tired of this stuff. Maybe if a few people get in touch, we'll do a masterclass or something. We'll figure it out. So let's wrap this up. What are the key messages here? 1, diversity reports contain a lot of marketing and not enough progress. 2, diversity reports rely on false proxies instead of operational data. And 3, diversity reports don't measure the things that they say they do. So what do you think? Are your diversity reports a true representation of your progress? Get in touch or leave a message. I would love to hear from you. If you've learned something from today's show, then give us a 5-star review and a comment wherever you're listening to the podcast. It helps other people like you to find the show. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode.